Picture the largest palace in Europe on a January morning so cold that the river beside it has been frozen solid for 2 months. Now fill it with 1,000 rooms, 117 staircases, and more than 1,000 stoves that have to be fed by hand in the dark before a single important person opens their eyes. Add sentries standing motionless in the snow with ice in their moustaches, a room where diamonds lie in open trays like hazelnuts, and corridors where the servants' tallow candles smell like burnt mutton fat because wax is for the apartments upstairs. Add one small woman of 60 in a loose grey dressing gown, awake before all of them, kneeling at her own hearth with a flint in her hand. That's the Winter Palace of St. Petersburg in the last years of Catherine the Great, the most gossiped about court in Europe and the most disciplined bedroom in it, a place where a footman could be dressed in gold braid worth more than his village, and still sleep 6 to a room under the rafters. A place where you could haul firewood up a black staircase at 4 in the morning, and by evening watch the most powerful human being on earth apologize to a chimney sweep. We're going back there tonight, not as tourists shuffling past the throne room with our heads tipped back. We're going in through the servants' door into the private apartments, into the small rooms behind the gilded ones, the bedroom, the dressing room, the study, the rooms where the legend was actually lived, one cold morning at a time. And I have to be straight with you before we go in, because this particular story needs it. Catherine the Great may be the most lied about woman in the history of the world. More filth was invented about her bedroom after her death than about any other room on this planet. So tonight runs on one rule, and I will hold myself to it all night. I will tell you what the record supports, and every time we cross the line from document into gossip, I will say so, out loud, in plain words. Documented is documented. Gossip is gossip. Slander is slander. And before the night is over, we will pick up the worst of the slander. You already know the one I mean, the one with the horse. And we will take it apart in front of you, piece by piece, and I will show you where it actually came from, and when, and why it is not true, and what really happened in that dressing room in November of 1796. That's the contract. Hold me to it. One more honest thing, and then we go in. The rooms tonight are real. The dates are real. The Empress is real, and so are the people around her. Her valet, her chamber companion, her secretary, her favourites. They all existed. They left diaries and memoirs and pension records, and everything they do tonight is what the record says they did. But the eyes I'm lending you belong to no single person the archives can name. Hundreds of girls carried firewood and linen and coffee trays through those corridors across those years, and history wrote down almost none of their names. So tonight you'll be one of them, a composite stitched together from the servants' accounts, the secretary's diary, and the Empress's own remarkably frank memoirs. The palace is real. The eyes are borrowed. I will always tell you which is which. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I still have no idea whether anyone actually sleeps to them, or whether you're all just weirdos who want to know what an Empress's chambermaid could smell at 4 o'clock on a Russian winter morning. Either way, subscribe if you want, get comfortable. Here we go. You're 20 steps from the Empress's bedroom door and you are late. Not late by much. A few minutes maybe. But you have been in this palace long enough to know that a few minutes is a category of disaster all its own, and your heart is doing something painful and fast under your ribs as you come up the last turn of the narrow service stair with the firewood basket dragging your right shoulder down. Birch billets, split small, and a bundle of resin-dipped kindling on top. Perhaps 20 pounds of it. The rope handle has pressed a hot line across your palm through the wool of your mitten, and your breath is coming out of you in little white flags because the service stairs of the Winter Palace are not heated. Nothing about your side of the palace is heated. The stoves face the good rooms. The backs of the stoves face you. And when I say cold, I need you to understand what that means in a Petersburg January in 1788. This is not the cold of a brisk walk. This is cold as a permanent fact of the architecture. Cold that lives in the stone the way damp lives in a cellar. Cold that finds the gap between your mitten and your sleeve like a needle finding a vein. Outside these walls it is perhaps 25 degrees below freezing, and the Neva is a white road, and the sentries in the courtyard are changed every hour so they don't die. In here, on the black stair, it is cold enough that the tallow candle in the wall bracket has gone stiff and burns with a small, greasy, reluctant flame that smells like a kitchen accident. You reach the top. The corridor here is low and plain, whitewash and worn boards, running behind the private apartments like the space behind a stage set. Which is exactly what it is. On the far side of that wall, a few inches of brick and tile away, are silk panels and parquet floors laid in patterns like frozen music. On your side, whitewash, a shelf of candle stubs, and a girl with a rope-burn palm hurrying in felt slippers because leather soles make noise, and noise, in this corridor, at this hour is forbidden. That's the first thing they beat into you here, if we're being honest about the word. You are to be silent. You are to be invisible. The work must appear to have done itself. A fire that is seen being laid is a fire laid badly. You may spend 2 hours before dawn hauling and sweeping and carrying so that the Empress's morning looks effortless, but you may not be caught doing it, because your visible effort would be a kind of stain on the room. You are necessary and you're not supposed to exist, both at once. Every servant in every palace in Europe knows this arithmetic, and none of them ever quite stops feeling it. You put your free hand on the latch of the service door, the little door, papered on its far side to vanish into the wall of the anteroom, and that is when you smell it. Smoke. Birch smoke. Thin and clean and fresh, drifting to you through the seams of the door, and under it something darker and richer, a smell you've only known for a few weeks, a smell that still makes no sense to your village nose at this hour of the morning. Coffee, roasted, ground and brewing, somewhere on the other side of that wall, in the dark of a winter morning, in the private apartments of the autocrat of all the Russias. Your stomach drops through the floor. Because smoke means fire, and fire means the stove is lit, and the stove being lit means somebody has done your work. And in this palace, somebody doing your work does not mean you've been given a kindness. It means you've been found slow and replaced, and there is a procedure for girls who are found slow, and it starts with the housekeeper, and ends with a cart back to Ryazan and your mother's face when you climb down from it. You stand there, absolutely still, 20 pounds of firewood cutting into your palm, listening to your own blood. Then the little door opens from the inside and a man looks out at you. He's perhaps 50, thick through the chest, in a plain dark coat, with the kind of face that gives away nothing, because it has spent 30 years practicing. Zakhar Konstantinovich Zoto. The Empress's own valet, one of the men closest to her body and her mornings of anyone alive, a man whom generals in the anterooms treat carefully, and he is looking at a frozen girl with a basket, and what he does is put one finger to his lips. Then he beckons you in, takes the basket off your arm as if it weighed nothing, and leans down to your ear. She lit it herself, he says, barely a breath. She's been up since before 5. She's not to be disturbed, she's not to be looked at, and you are not in trouble. A pause. You can hear now from beyond the anteroom the small skeletal scratching of a pen. Rule 1 of these rooms, girl. Learn it tonight and you'll outlast us all. The fire is already lit, it is always already lit. Her Majesty does not wake servants. You don't understand. Your face must say so, because something shifts at the corner of his mouth, the ghost of an expression he'd never let out in daylight. He tilts his head a few degrees toward the inner door. And because the anteroom is dark and the inner door is ajar and the world is strange at 5 in the morning you will remember what you see for the rest of your life, and no one will ever believe you, because it is not what anyone outside these walls imagines when they say her name. A small room, modest, almost plain, by the standards of what you've glimpsed of the state apartments. No gold avalanche, no throne. A tiled stove in the corner with a young fire talking quietly to itself. A screen. A bed behind it that has already been left. And at a writing table in the pool of light from a 2-candle stand, a heavy-set woman of nearly 60 in a loose gown of grey lilac silk, a white cap over her greying hair, steel-rimmed spectacles down her nose, writing. Fast. Page after page. A pile of finished sheets at her left elbow, a Sèvres coffee pot on a spirit stand at her right, and at her feet, flat out on a cushion like small sign sculptures, 2 English greyhounds. The most powerful woman in the world, sovereign of an empire that runs from Poland to the far edge of the map. Up before her own servants, in the dark, in the cold, having knelt at her own hearth with her own flint so as not to wake a single one of them, drinking coffee she measured herself, writing letters to philosophers while all of Europe sleeps. The pen scratches, a dog sighs, the fire ticks. That is the secret, by the way. You have been in the room 30 seconds and you've already seen the deepest secret of Catherine the Great's bedroom, the one the pamphlets will never print because nobody would pay for it. Discipline. A fire laid by her own hands, and a desk, and the dark hours of the morning, every morning for 34 years. But nobody ever got famous telling the truth about a woman's bedroom. Zotov's hand closes on your shoulder, light as a bird, and steers you backward out of the anteroom, and the papered door clicks shut, and you are in the cold corridor again with your empty basket and your heart going like a hare. You're 16 years old. You have been inside the Winter Palace for 1 month and 11 days, and you've just seen the Empress of Russia for the first time, not on a throne, not on a horse, in a green uniform the way the engravings show her, but in her dressing gown, in her spectacles, lighting her own fire. Welcome to the private apartments of Catherine the Great, St. Petersburg, in the winter of 1788. You will spend the next 9 years of your life behind these papered doors, and you should probably know how you got here. You are from a village near Ryazan, 5 days hard travel to the southeast, a place with 1 church, 1 pond, and a winter that eats the old people. Your father does carpentry for the estate there. Your mother buries her cabbage in straw in October and digs it out pale and sweet in March. You're the 3rd of 6 living children. You can read. The priest's widow taught you, which changed your whole life, though you didn't know it yet. And you sew a straighter seam than anyone in the parish. And the estate near yours, as it happens, belongs to the family of a woman called Maria Savishna Perekusikina. Remember that name, because the whole palace knows it. Maria Savishna is not a noblewoman of any consequence, not a countess, barely gentry, small Ryazan stock, like the fields you grew up next to. and she sleeps closer to the Empress of Russia than almost any human being alive. She is the Empress's chamber companion, her trusted Kammerjungfrau of many years, the woman who is with her at the very end of the day and the very beginning. Court ladies with diamond ciphers on their shoulders wait in the outer rooms. Maria Savishna walks in. Foreign ambassadors have been known to send her polite little presents, on the theory that a kind word from her at bedtime is worth more than an hour of formal audience. Whether the theory works, no one can prove. That it exists tells you everything about what a bedroom means in this world. When the household needed another pair of quick, clean hands below stairs, a girl to carry, mend, launder fine linen and keep her mouth shut, the housekeeper asked. The word went down the line, and somewhere at the end of the line was Ryazan, and the priest's widow said your name. So in the last days of November 1787 you kissed your mother, who cried, and your father, who didn't, and your mother put into your hands the one thing of value she had to give, a flint and steel in a little tin box, polished by 40 years of her own thumb, the same box she had lit every morning fire of your childhood with, old-fashioned, dented at one corner, with a scrap of charcloth folded inside. There is a whole storeroom of lamplighter's tools in the palace basement. You will never need your own. You carry it anyway every day, in the pocket tied under your skirt next to your body where it rides warm. Your mother lit fires for people her whole life, said the box without words. Now you. Keep an eye on that little box. It has a long way to travel tonight. And when I say the palace you walked into was large, I need you to understand what that means, because your village had 30 households and you could name every dog in it. The stewards say the Winter Palace has more than 1,000 rooms. They say 117 staircases and close to 2,000 windows, and enough doors that a man could open one every minute of a long working day and not touch them all. You have no way to check any of this, and neither does anyone else you've ever met. The palace is counted the way the stars are counted, by people you'll never meet, in numbers you take on faith. What you know is what your legs know. From the wood cellars to the Empress's back stair is 400 and some steps, 2 of the turns pitch dark even at noon. A full watercan weighs more than your youngest brother. The corridor under the roof where you sleep, in a row of iron cots with 5 other girls, is 40 paces long and smells of tallow, cold stone, and the cheap rose soap the girl from Novgorod hoards under her pillow. Below the parquet where emperors dance, there is an entire second city. Kitchens like cathedrals of copper, a candle office, a linen office where sheets are numbered and logged like state papers, because they are state papers of a kind. The Empress's household runs on inventories, and a pillowcase can be traced like a criminal. Hundreds upon hundreds of people, cooks, stovemen, sweeps, laundresses, footmen, runners, furnace stokers who spend their whole working lives in the warm dark between the walls, feeding the stoves and fireplaces by the hundred, so that the people above them never once think about the word warm. That's the design. The whole architecture of your life is arranged so that certain other people never have to finish a thought that begins with the cold. You eat standing up most days, black bread and shtchi at a plank table with no bench on your side of it, because the bench side is for the senior women. You're not permitted on the state staircases ever, for any reason. If a member of the imperial family should by some accident enter a corridor you're in, the rule is simple. Face the wall. Set down what you carry. Turn, face the wall, and be a piece of furniture until the footsteps are gone. The first time it happens to you, A rustle of silk, a wave of scent like a garden in July, unhurried steps, gone. You stand with your nose a hand's width from the whitewash and your pulse banging in your ears, and you realise you have no idea who it was and that this is the point. They passed a wall, and one piece of the wall had a heartbeat. You cry twice in the first month, both times silently, into the smell of the tallow corridor. That's normal. Every girl in that attic did the same in her first month. Nobody mentions it. The girl from Novgorod leaves a heel of white bread on your pillow, the good kind, upstairs bread, and says nothing about that either. And then, at the end of your first month, on the day after you saw the Empress light her own fire, you're summoned, a word that stops your breath, to Maria Savishna Perekusikina. She receives you in a small warm room that smells of coffee grounds and orange peel, and she looks nothing like what the name has grown into inside your head. A round, brisk, grey-eyed woman in her late 40s in a good plain dress, with a Ryazan way of softening her vowels that hits you like the smell of your mother's kitchen. She looks you over the way your grandmother looked over a horse at a fair and asks who taught you to read and what your father pays for salt at home, and listens to the answers as if they mattered. Then she teaches you your trade. Not the carrying and mending. The housekeeper's women teach that. Maria Savishna teaches you the real trade, the one there's no name for, in 6 sentences you will keep till you die. Her Majesty rises before you do, girl, whatever hour you rise. Don't race her, surf around her. She'll light her own fire. That's hers, don't you touch it. A person who has taken a whole empire onto her hands is entitled to keep one small thing in them. She'll speak to you plainly if she speaks at all. Answer plainly back. She can smell fright the way you smell smoke, and it's the one thing that offends her. What you see in these rooms, you may see. What you say of these rooms, you say never. Not to the girls in the attic, not to your priest, not to your own pillow. A pause. She straightens a candlestick a finger's width, the way tidy women do when they're deciding how much truth you can carry. And when the day comes that you hear people outside these walls talk about what she is, and you'll hear it in the market from fools in livery, from fine folk who should know better, you'll say nothing then either. You'll just know. That will have to be enough for you. It's been enough for me for 20 years. Then she gives you a honey cracknel out of a japanned box exactly as if you were 8 and sends you back to work. That's your mistress of the craft then. Not a shouter. Something far more frightening. A woman who is never wrong about what's needed, who has held her place at the most watched bedside in Europe for 2 decades without one recorded scandal, and who can end your entire existence in this palace with half a sentence spoken quietly to the right person, and who would, without malice, the way you'd cull a hen. You'd rather please her than anyone you've ever met. That too is a kind of design. So the winter of 1788 settles into its groove, and your life inside the machine begins. Up at 4, in the black cold, in a dress still shaped like yesterday. Down 4 flights, through the warm shock of the kitchen corridors, where the bakers have been at it since 2, and the air is a wall of bread. Wood, water, linen. Up the back stair. Silence past the papered door. By 5:30 you can hear it if you still yourself. The faint scratch, scratch, scratch on the far side of the wall. By 6, the smell of coffee. And here I have to stop and tell you about the coffee, because the coffee is famous below stairs the way battles are famous above them. The Empress drinks 1 pot in the morning. 1. But the making of it is a legend with numbers attached, and the numbers get repeated in the kitchen corridors with the reverence your village kept for scripture. a full pound of ground coffee to 5 small cups worth of water. A pound! You have seen the tin measure. Coffee so black and dense it looks lacquered. Coffee that a spoon almost stands in, brewed strong enough. The old footmen swear this happened, and swear it on saints. That when one of her secretaries, half dead after a night of work, was once given a cup of it in mercy, his heart set off at gallop and they had to walk him around the anteroom like an overheated horse. She takes it with thick cream and gives the soaked biscuits to the greyhounds, who consider the morning tray partly theirs and are not entirely wrong. And then, this is the part your mother will never believe, the part you'll want to put in letters and won't, because rule 1, the grounds from that single pot do not get thrown out. A pound of coffee is money, real money. A pound of good beans costs more than you see in cash in a month. So the spent grounds go down the chain. The stove men brew them again, and that second brew is still stronger than anything a merchant's house in Ryazan ever tasted. Then the grounds go down again, to the scullery for a third pressing. 1 pot, 1 small determined woman at a desk in the dark, and the wake of her breakfast washes down through the palace like a tide, warming furnace stokers and laundry girls 3 floors below her spectacles. You get your share on the coldest mornings, 3rd brew, in a tin mug with no handle. You drink it leaning against the warm back of a stove in the wall of a corridor, standing up, eyes closed, 10 stolen minutes while the palace turns over into daylight above you. Remember the coffee, too. Everything in this story that matters comes down in the end to that morning pot, to what it says about her and to the last morning anyone ever brewed it. By the spring of 1789 you have been noticed, quietly, the only way anything good ever happens to people like you. Your seams are straight. Your feet are silent. Your mouth stays shut. And Maria Savishna's eye has been on you for a year without your knowing it. So the work changes. You're moved up from the cellars and corridors world into the wardrobe service of the private apartments. Fine linen, the care of the day gowns, the carrying of trays and candles, and wash water to the anterooms of the Empress herself. You will never be a lady-in-waiting. There is blood and rank between you and that, a wall higher than the palace. But you are now one of perhaps a dozen women who pass daily through the small rooms. The wall you used to face has turned sideways and let you in behind it, which means that for the next 7 years the private mourning of Catherine the Great runs through your hands. And since her private mourning is the thing this whole night is about, the thing the title of this story promised you, the thing her servants actually revealed in memoirs and diaries and depositions, as against the things liars invented, let me give it to you the way you learned it, hour by hour, habit by habit. This is the secret life of the most notorious bedroom in Europe from the inside. She wakes at 5 in her younger years, 6 in these later ones, and no one wakes her. There is no ceremony of rising, no French theatre of the lever with courtiers ranked around the bed the way Versailles does it. The bed itself would disappoint every pamphleteer in Paris. Behind its screen it is neat, practical, more soldierly than sultanate. She rises, she puts on the loose gown. She has them in grey and lilac and white. Wide, simple things a merchant's widow might wear. And a plain cap, and she goes and kneels at the stove and lights it with her own hands. You have seen the small scorch marks on her fingers. Her reason, which she gave more than once, and which the whole household repeats like a proverb. These servants are asleep, and they work long days, and there is no cause to wake a tired person, to do what a healthy person can do for herself in 2 minutes. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it is documented and it is strange and nobody ever puts it in the famous stories. The woman who commands more human beings than any other living person begins every day with an act of consideration for the half-dozen humblest people in her orbit. Not once as a performance, every morning for decades unseen, which is the opposite of performance. And once the habit went wrong, and the way it went wrong tells you more about her than any battle. It's a story the older servants tell you your first year, and they tell it grinning. One morning at Tsarskoye Selo she lit her fire as usual, and a storm of the most magnificent cursing came down the chimney. A sweep's boy was up on the roof, partway through cleaning that very flue, and the smoke came up into his work and his face, and he leaned into the chimney mouth and roared down every word the wharves of the Neva had ever taught him at whatever idiot had lit the stove. The idiot in question, the autocrat of all the Russias, put her fire out, doused it herself, called down the flue that she begged his pardon, and waited, Empress of 100 million souls in a cold room, until the boy on the roof was done. He is said to have nearly fallen off the roof when he learned whom he'd been educating. She is said to have laughed about it for years. So is the entire palace, forever. Then the fire is drawing, and she washes. And here is another habit her own household swore to, simple and hard as the country she rules. Ice. A piece of clean ice brought up in a basin, and she rubs her face and neck with it, every morning, winter and summer. Petersburg ladies whisper that this is the secret of her complexion, which even her enemies concede is astonishing in a woman her age. You suspect the actual secret is the same as the secret of everything else in these rooms. She decided long ago on a routine, and she has the kind of will that keeps a routine for 40 years, and the routine happens to be cheap, cold, and entirely her own. Then the coffee, you know about the coffee, and then the desk, and the desk is the true centre of the room. Not the bed, the desk. From roughly 6 until 9, the Empress of Russia writes, alone, in her spectacles, with the dogs at her feet and the pot going cold at her elbow. She writes to her ministers and her generals. She writes memoranda on law, on schools, on the plague, on the price of salt. She writes plays, comedies, some of them performed at her own Hermitage Theatre, with the authorship politely unmentioned and universally known. She writes fables for her grandsons, and a primer for their education, because she has opinions about how children should be taught, and an empire's worth of means to enforce them. And what she does with that power is write alphabet books. She has filled her private notebooks with maxims, drafts, self-scoldings, jokes. She will tell anyone who asks. She told her correspondents in half the capitals of Europe that she has a mania for writing the way other people have manias for cards, and for 15 years, until his death in 1778, the letters went back and forth between this desk and a house at Ferney on the Swiss border, between the Empress of Russia and Monsieur Voltaire, the most dangerous pen alive. That correspondence is real. You can read it today. Flattery in both directions, yes, and policy dressed as philosophy, but real. And when he died, she did something no one in Europe quite knew how to digest. She bought his library, all of it, 6,700 and some volumes, his own margin scribbled in his own hand, packed into crates, shipped across the Baltic, and installed in her hermitage, a few minutes' walk from where you're standing with your linen basket. The books of the man the Church of France would barely bury sit under her roof, and she walks past them the way other sovereigns walk past ancestors. At 9 the doors open and the day's machine engages. Secretaries first, then ministers. And the secretary you come to know, by sight and habit, year in and year out, is a heavy-set, soft-voiced, watchful man named Alexander Vasilievich Krapovitsky. He waits in the anteroom with his portfolios. You bring the tray past him. He stands aside for a laundry girl with a courtesy most colonels don't offer, because the small rooms have their own etiquette, and he has survived by mastering it. What you cannot know, what nobody in the household knows, is that Krapovitsky goes home and writes it all down, a diary day after day, what she said, what she signed, what made her laugh, what made her ill, how she took the great news and the bad. Historians will live off that diary like bread. Half of what the world can honestly claim to know about the private Catherine of these years comes from the quiet man you hand coffee past every morning. The palace is full of eyes tonight, and his are the best of them. From her own desk, meanwhile, comes the thing that will outlast every ministry, the memoirs. She's been writing the story of her own life, on and off for years, in French, frank past the point of scandal, and locked away. You have seen the pages only as pages, squared off and set aside, sealed sometimes into envelopes with instructions on them. You cannot read French. It is probably the only reason a girl like you is allowed to dust that desk, because here is what is in them. The world will find out later and gasp. I'll tell you now, and I'm telling you only what she herself set down. She was not born to any of this. She was born Sophie, a minor German princess from Stettin in 1729, hauled to Russia at 14 to be married off, renamed Ekaterina, wedded at 16, in August 1745, to the heir to the throne, her second cousin Peter. And the memoirs say, in her own steady hand, what that marriage was. Nothing. A husband who was a boy in all the wrong ways, who drilled hounds and hanged a rat, with full military ceremony, for eating 2 of his toy soldiers of starch in her own chamber, who set his toys out on the marriage bed, who left his young wife alone year after year, humiliated in front of a court that blamed her for the empty nursery. A girl alone in a foreign country with no friend she could keep. The Empress Elizabeth took away anyone she grew attached to. And what she did with those years was read. Voltaire, Tacitus, Montesquieu, Bayle's dictionary, all of it, like a prisoner tunnelling with a spoon. She rode, astride, which scandalised everyone hours a day alone. And she wrote down a private vow which you may take as the key to this entire palace, that she would make herself agreeable to the people she had to live among, that she would learn this country like a discipline, and that she would wait. Her word, more or less. Wait. The world knows how the waiting ended. In July 1762, her husband had been emperor for 6 months, and had managed to insult the army, the church, and every ally Russia had. And on the 28th of June, old style, she put on a borrowed guard's uniform, took the salute of regiments that came over to her one after another, and by nightfall the empire had changed hands without a shot. 8 days later, Peter was dead at the manor of Ropsha, where his captors held him. And here the record itself goes dark, and I'll treat it the way I promised to treat everything tonight. What survives is a letter from Alexei Orlov, the guard commander on the spot, claiming a drunken brawl. What the capitals of Europe said then, and historians argue still, is murder by her partisans. Whether she ordered it, knew of it, or merely profited from it, no document proves. She wore mourning, said little, and reigned for 34 years. That is the honest edge of the known, and I won't step past it tonight or ever. but notice, because her servants noticed, what she kept from those wilderness years, once she owned the whole board. The 5 o'clock rising of the girl who had only her mornings to herself, the reading, the writing, the horsemanship, until age took it, the self-command of a person who spent 18 years unable to afford a single visible mistake. The bedroom habits of Catherine the Great, the real ones, were forged by a lonely 16-year-old with a book under her pillow and a husband playing soldiers on the counterpane. Everything else is commentary. At the desk, by the inkstand, there is one object you are never to move, and it is the 5th thing tonight I'll ask you to keep an eye on. A snuff box. Gold. Heavy. Always in the same place, with a portrait on the lid. Peter the Great. She does not carry that one. She has snuff boxes by the dozen for carrying. This one lives on the desk facing her. She was asked about it once. The story ran through the household in a day, and her answer was this: she keeps him there to ask him questions. When a matter is tangled past reason, she looks at that stern, impossible man who dragged Russia into the modern world with his own hands, and asks herself, what would he command? Then she signs. And yes, the snuff. She takes it constantly, it stains her fingers, and she takes it with her left hand only. Ask her why, as some brave soul once did, and you get the reply of a woman who has thought about every square inch of her own public body. Because subjects kiss the sovereign's right hand, and no one should have to kiss a hand that smells of tobacco. Even her vices file past in good order. At the desk's foot, always, the dogs, English greyhounds, narrow as parentheses, insufferably aristocratic, adored. The line goes back decades to a pair from England. The old dog keepers still speak of Sir Tom Anderson, who lived to a great age and populated half the court with his descendants, and of Zamira, her favourite, who slept in the imperial bedchamber in a lined basket, and for whom, when she died, a French ambassador's pen was borrowed to compose an epitaph. There is a monument to the dogs at Tsarskoye Selo, a pyramid by the lake. You have seen it. In these years, the basket by the fire belongs to an ageing brindled bitch of that same line, grey at the muzzle, who inspects your ankles each morning like a customs official, and escorts the Empress's breakfast tray with total moral confidence in her share of it. Where the Empress walks in the private rooms, the old dog walks. Keep her in the corner of your eye. She will be there at the very end of this story, at a closed door, and she will break your heart. That is the morning. That is the famous bedroom revealed. A stove lit in secret kindness, a basin of ice, a pot of terrifying coffee, 3 hours of ink before most of her court can find its slippers, a dead philosopher's library down the hall, an old dog, and a dead emperor's face on a snuff-box consulted like an oracle. But you have heard the other stories. Of course you have. Everyone in Europe has heard the other stories, and I promised you we'd walk straight at them, documents first. So now we have to talk about the staircase. There is, off the private apartments, a small internal stair. Nothing grand. A turn of steps behind a door covered in green baize, connecting the Empress's rooms with a suite of apartments on the floor below. You clean it. You know its geography the way you know your own teeth. 14 steps, a rail waxed dark by hands, a lamp niche, a runner of carpet fixed with brass rods that you polish on Thursdays. It is the least remarkable staircase in a palace of 117, and it is the most famous staircase in Europe, because of what the apartments below it are for. They are the apartments of the favourite, and the favourite in the Russia of Catherine the Great is not a secret. That is the first thing you must understand, and the thing the foreign pamphlets can never forgive her. There is no hypocrisy in it. The kings of France kept official mistresses for 200 years, gave them titles and chateaux and let them run ministries, and Europe called it civilization. Catherine, a widow since 1762, unmarriageable by reason of state, for whom could an empress marry without handing Russia to a subject or a foreigner, keeps openly a favourite. He's presented at court. He holds rank, usually as her adjutant. He has those apartments below hers, and the use of that stair, and a place at her small evening parties. And when it ends, it always ends, he is not disgraced, not imprisoned, not quietly drowned, which is how other centuries and other courts have retired inconvenient lovers. He is pensioned. Estates, serfs, money, sometimes a palace. Every one of them left richer than dukes. Not one of them was ever harmed. Over 34 years of reign, the men who held that position number about a dozen. History can name them all, in order like a regimental roll, precisely because none of it was hidden. Grigory Orlov, who helped put her on the throne and held his place for a decade. Poor bland Vasilchikov, who bored her. Potemkin. We'll come to Potemkin. You can't take him in a list. Zavadovsky, Zorich, Rimsky-Korsakov, Lanskoy, the gentle one, who dropped dead of a fever in 1784 at 26. And here the record shows you something the caricatures never will. She collapsed. She, the machine of routine, could not be got out of bed. She would not leave Tsarskoye Selo for months. Her letters from that summer read like a woman gutted. Then Yermolov, then Mamonov, and then, from 1789, the An whose apartments you now carry linen past. Platon Alexandrovich Zubov, 22 years old to her 60, with a face like a cameo, and the self-importance of a man 3 times his size. Say what the record says, and only that about what the arrangement was behind the baize door. They were her lovers. She never pretended otherwise, and I won't insult you by pretending either. This is not a story about a misunderstood nun. But now hold up beside that plain documented fact the other thing the record shows, from her own pen. In 1774 she wrote to Potemkin. The letter survives. You can read it. A confession disguised as an accounting, going through the sparse history of her attachments, and ending with the sentence that unlocks every door in this corridor. The trouble, she wrote, is that my heart cannot be content even 1 hour without love. Not without pleasure. Without love. Read her letters to these men. Hundreds survive. She wrote to Potemkin sometimes 4 times a day, and what pours out is not what the pamphlets promise. It is nicknames, quarrels, apologies, jokes about her own temper, plans, griefs, baby talk in 3 languages, loneliness with the lid off. It is the writing of a woman who was married at 16 to a husband who never once loved her, who is forbidden by the size of her own throne from ever marrying again, and who keeps trying, with the only instrument the law of empire leaves her, to have what your mother has in a log house in Ryazan. That is what the staircase is for. 14 steps between the desk where she rules an empire alone and the one room in the world where somebody is glad to see her, not the crown. And now, since I promised, the gossip, labelled as gossip. You will hear. The whole palace has heard. The whole continent has heard. That candidates for those apartments were first tested by one of her ladies, and the smirkers even attach a name to the office. Understand what that story is. A courtier's sneer. passed drawing room to drawing room, written down years later by men who were not there, in memoirs sold by the pound. There is no document, there is no witness at first hand. The household you serve in, which knows every sheet and every hour, laughs at it, grimly, the way you laugh at a lie about your own kitchen. It may amuse Vienna and Paris. It is not evidence, and on this channel it goes in the bin marked gossip, where it has always belonged. What is evidence? Because the Treasury kept books, is what the institution cost, and I'll give it to you straight, because it belongs to the honest picture too. The gifts were enormous. Estates with thousands of souls on them, cash in the hundreds of thousands of rubles, pensions for life, for the grandest of them, millions across a career. Historians who have tried to total the whole system across the reign arrive at figures in the tens of millions of rubles. The estimates vary, and I'll flag them as estimates, but even the floor of the range is staggering. For scale, you, a wardrobe girl of the private apartments, are paid a few rubles a year in your keep, and you are well placed. Your father has never in his life held 100 rubles at once. A single evening's card losses in the apartments below the stair would buy your entire village twice. You know this the way servants know everything, and you feel about it what servants have always felt. A shrug that isn't quite a shrug. The rich are weather. You don't resent the snow, you sweep it. But if you want to know what she was, not what she spent, watch what happened in the summer of 1789, in those same apartments, one flight down. You were there for the aftermath. The household talked of nothing else for a month. The favourite then was Alexander Mammonoff, clever, handsome, spoiled, 30. And Mammonoff, who owed her everything, had fallen in love, secretly, stupidly, with one of her own maids of honour, Princess Daria Shcherbatova, 60 years old, the most powerful woman alive, betrayed in her own palace, by a man half her age with a girl half his. Every playwright in Europe knows how that scene ends. Poison, a fortress, a convent, at the very least ruin. Here is how it actually ended, and the record is unambiguous. She wept. Krapovitsky's sort of detail. The small rooms were grey for days, and then she summoned the pair of them and betrothed them, herself. She stood the girl in front of her and pinned diamonds on her. She gave them a wedding gift of 100,000 rubles and an estate with more than 2,000 souls, saw them married in the court chapel, and sent them off to Moscow to live rich and ashamed for the rest of their lives. The angriest thing she's reliably recorded to have said of the man who humiliated her is that he ought to have told her the truth sooner. You saw her the morning after the wedding, through the open door of the study, at the desk, in the spectacles, writing, the old dog's chin on her foot. The fire was already lit. Whatever that woman was made of, the pamphlets have not located it. And Potemkin. You have to have Potemkin because the whole edifice, the staircase, the apartments, the dozen names, makes no sense without him, and because with him we walk right up to the sharpest edge between document and rumour in this entire story, and I want to show you how to walk an edge like that honestly. Grigory Alexandrovich Potemkin, a one-eyed giant out of the middling Smolensk gentry, moody as October, brilliant past the patience of everyone around him, a man who could dictate to 3 clerks at once, bite his nails to the quick, she teased him for it in writing, and fall into black weeks of melancholy in a darkened room with a Bible and a dish of radishes. Her lover officially only from 1774 to 1776, 2 years, and then for 15 more until his death. Something the language of courts has no word for. Co-ruler in all but title. viceroy of the whole new Russia in the south, builder of fleets and cities, Kherson, Nikolaev, Sevastopol, the annexer of Crimea in 1783, Prince of the Holy Roman Empire, the second man of the empire by such a distance that ambassadors reported to their kings, plainly, that Russia had two sovereigns and the junior one wore a crown. The favourites who came after him did not replace him. They orbited him. The court whispered, and here the household's own observation backs the whisper, that no young man settled into the apartments below the stair without the prince's tolerance, and none survived his displeasure. When he swept into Petersburg, always unannounced, always like a weather system, protocol simply dissolved. You have seen it with your own eyes, in your second year. A huge man in a loose fur-lined gown, unpowdered, half-dressed by every rule of the court, walking into the private apartments past bowing chamberlains as if the palace were his family's farmhouse. Jewelled rings on the hand he'd bitten raw, trailed by adjutants with maps. No one else alive enters her rooms like that. No one else alive gets shouted at by her behind doors. Actually shouted at. You have heard it through two walls, her voice and his like a storm in the next province. And then, an hour later, the two of them at a small table over cold beef and pickles, roaring with laughter, redrawing the Black Sea. Why? On what footing? Here is the edge, so watch the footwork. In the surviving letters, hundreds of them, authenticated, printed now for anyone to read, she calls him, in her own hand, my dear husband, my lord and master. She refers to herself as his wife, not once, repeatedly across years. There is a persistent, specific tradition traceable to the circle of his own family and hers, of a secret marriage, a night ceremony at the little church of St. Sampson across the Neva. In June of 1774, a handful of witnesses, rings kept. No certificate has ever been produced. No register page survives or ever surfaced. So, the letters are documents, and they say, husband. The wedding is a report, credible, specific, and unproven. Most serious historians think it probably happened. Tonight, in this story, we say exactly that, probably, and we do not say more, because the difference between probably and certainly is the entire difference between history and the pamphlets, and on this channel that line stays bright. What needs no proving is what he was to her. Keep him in view, that one-eyed thundercloud of a man. In a little while this story's going to do to you what October of 1791 did to her, and I want you to feel it properly when it comes. As for the apartments below the stair in these, your years, they belong, as I said, to young Platon Zubov, and the household's opinion of Platon Zubov is best conveyed by the fact that the household, which has genuine love for its Empress and had genuine awe of Potemkin, refers to the favourite's monkey more respectfully than to the favourite. Yes, the monkey. It's documented. A French officer who danced attendance in those rooms wrote it down with his own scalded dignity. Zubov holds morning levees now in imitation of a great man's toilette. He sits being powdered and curled while the anteroom fills with generals, senators, petitioners, grey men with 40 years' service standing, waiting on the pleasure of a beautiful boy of 20-something, because the road to the Empress's signature has come to run more and more through his apartments, and through that waiting crowd, along the chairbacks and the epaulettes, and on one immortal occasion, the wigs, travels a small privileged ape, snatching what it likes, answerable, like its master, to no one. Old men who stormed Ottoman fortresses hold still and let it happen, hating themselves, because the monkey has better access than they do. You carry pressed linen past that anteroom twice a week. You keep your eyes down and your face wooden, the way Maria Savishna taught you, and you file what you see where the household files everything, in the deep drawer for later. 60 years of iron routine upstairs, this downstairs, the same 14 steps between them. You are perhaps the only class of person in the empire who sees both floors in the same hour, and what you feel climbing back up toward the small rooms, past the baize door, toward the scratch of the pen and the smell of the morning pot, is something you'd be flogged for saying aloud, so you never say it. Upstairs works harder than anyone in this building, and upstairs is lonely, and downstairs is what loneliness plus an empire's worth of means buys at 67. The pen scratches on the far side of the wall. You straighten your load and keep climbing. If the mornings belong to the desk, the evenings belong to the small society, and the evenings are where you finally learn her voice, because a wardrobe girl is furniture, and people speak in front of furniture. Dinner is at 1, sometimes 2, and it would disgrace a merchant's table. This is the second great anticlimax of imperial service, after the plain bed. The most powerful woman in the world eats by preference boiled beef with pickled cucumbers, day after day. Her cooks, capable of architecture in sugar, despair. The dish goes up anyway. She eats moderately, drinks next to nothing, a glass cut with water, and is done in under an hour because the afternoon has work in it. The gorgeous gluttony of courts bores her the way most appetites of display bore her. Food, in her private arithmetic, is fuel and company. The company matters more. And in the evening, 2 or 3 times a week, the company assembles, not in the staterooms, but in the hermitage, her retreat along the palace's flank, past the picture galleries she has stuffed with half the auctioned masterpieces of Europe and the library of Monsieur Voltaire. The parties are small, old friends, wits, a diplomat or two who can behave, her grandchildren when they're good. And at the entrance, posted where every guest must read them, hang her rules, written by her own hand, and I promise you every word of this is real. You can read them today. Rule 1. On entering, leave your rank at the door, together with your hat and your sword. Ranks at the door, the deepest rank-sick empire on earth. Be merry, the rules go on, but break nothing and spoil nothing. Speak moderately and not too loudly, that others' ears and heads may not ache. Argue without anger and without heat, and eat with appetite, but drink with measure, that each may find his legs on leaving. And the penalties, for she wrote penalties, whoever offends shall drink a glass of cold water, ladies not excepted, and read a page of the Telemachida aloud, the Telemachida being the worst long poem in the Russian language, a punishment of genuine severity, and whoever offends 3 times in one evening shall commit 6 lines of it to memory. That is the secret debauchery of the hermitage of Catherine the Great, sworn to by every servant who ever carried the tea in. An ageing woman making privy councillors giggle by fining them stanzas of bad verse. She plays cards there, whist, Boston, for token stakes, with partners she's had for decades. And she's genial about losing, which the old footmen say is rarer in sovereigns than mercy. By 10 she rises, and the party may go on without her. She withdraws through the small rooms, and Maria Savishna is waiting, and the day of the Empress closes as it opened, in plainness, gown off, cap, a few words, prayers brief, candle out by 11. You have, by your 3rd winter, stood often enough in the outer room at that hour to swear to the schedule like a ship's log. In the most scandalised about private suite in Europe, the lights go out at 11. Her temper, since you're behind the wall and hear what the wall hears, she has one. It is quick, hot, and short, like a fistful of straw catching. And what the household prizes is not its absence but what she does with it. She wrote it down herself, as a rule of governing. Praise aloud, scold quietly, and the small rooms confirm it daily. Reprimands happen behind doors, low-voiced, one-to-one. Commendation happens in front of witnesses, warmly, by name. When she is truly furious, and in these years the world gives her cause, the household reads it not in shouting, but in walking. Heels hard down the length of the inner gallery, once, twice, 10 times, until the fury has been marched to death. Then the door opens and business resumes in an even voice. She told one of her secretaries once. He told the anteroom, and the anteroom has kept it like a relic, that she never lets herself give an order in the first heat of anger, having observed that anger writes checks that justice has to tear up. With the servants themselves she is, and I know how this will sound against everything the world thinks it knows, and I am telling you what the people who emptied her basins actually recorded, gentle to the point of comedy. The anteroom's treasured story, sworn to by men grown grey in the service. She rang one evening and no one came, rang again, nothing. So she went out herself to find out why, and found the duty footman deep in a hand of cards, and the story says she did not end their game. The story says she took over the hand of the man whose turn it was to serve, and sent him off on her errand, and played his cards till he came back. Is it polished from telling? Certainly. Is it in character? You have seen her apologise down a chimney. The stovemen's version of the same truth is shorter. In 30 years, they say, she never once made a servant afraid on purpose. Afraid of failing her, always. Afraid of her? No. In the Russia of that century you could search a long time for a noble house of which the same was said. Which brings us, because honesty brings us, to the one person in the household's orbit around whom all this warmth drops dead in the air. Her son. The Grand Duke Paul is in his late 30s in these years, and he comes to his mother's palace the way winter comes to a port, on schedule, expected and braced against. You have seen him many times now, a small man, abrupt, with a snubbed, uneven face out of some old portrait wound tight as a watch, given to sudden parade ground furies and equally sudden wounded courtesies. He lives away from court, at Gatchina, where he drills his own little army in Prussian uniforms to Prussian time and waits. He has been waiting his whole life. His mother took the throne the year he was 8. By every logic he was raised to believe in, some of that throne was his. She has held all of it for over 30 years and has never once suggested she felt the loan. They meet in the formal rooms, mother and son, and exchange sentences like diplomats of hostile powers. The household, which loves her, is quietly, universally afraid of him. Remember that fear. In a few years it will be the law of the land, and this palace will learn what waiting does to a man. And here the honest road runs straight into the oldest question in the empire, so let's take it exactly the way I promised. Documents first, and stop where they stop. You will hear it whispered your whole service, in the corridors, in the town. Whose son is he? Because the memoirs, her own memoirs, the pages you dust, published to the world's gasp long after all of them are dead, tell the story of those years with a candour that still startles historians. They tell of a marriage unconsummated year after year while the court blamed her. They tell of the Empress Elizabeth's desperation for an heir, of hints dropped by go-betweens that the dynasty's need outranked the marriage vow. And they tell, in her own hand, of the handsome chamberlain Sergei Saltykov, set practically in her path, and of what followed. And then, precisely at the door of the nursery, her candour executes the neatest half-turn in the literature of memoir, and she declines, with a smile you can feel through the paper, to do the arithmetic for you. She raised the question herself deliberately, in pages she chose to preserve. She answered it never. Some historians note that Paul grew up the image of Peter III in Face and Obsessions and shrugged the rumour off. Others read the memoir as confession in all but the last sentence. There is no document that settles it. She handled it by leaving a loaded ambiguity on her desk for posterity, and tonight we handle it her way. The question is real. She posed it herself, and the answer is a door she closed. We don't kick doors on this channel. What she could not get from the son, she took. Took is the word, let the record show it plainly. From the grandsons. When Alexander was born in 1777, and Constantine after him, she lifted them from their parents' household almost as briskly as Elizabeth had once lifted Paul from hers, and installed them in her own orbit, and became, in her 60s, the thing the pamphlets would never print, a besotted, systematic, opinionated grandmother. It is for Alexander that she wrote the alphabet book. She designed the boys' loose, sensible clothing and bragged about it by letter to half of Europe. She supervised tutors like a quartermaster. On Hermitage evenings you have watched the autocrat of all the Russias on her knees on the parquet, being a bear. The court says, and for once the court and the household say the same thing, that the plan behind the doting is dynastic, that she means, perhaps, to pass over the son entirely and leave the empire straight to the grandson. Is it true? She never signed such a thing that anyone has produced. Papers, the whisper insists, exist. Remember that whisper too. On the night this story turns, it will be in the room like a lit fuse, and what happened to it is one of the real mysteries, the documented kind, of the century. So there is your household, the whole strange solar system of the small rooms, the Empress at the centre with her ice and her fink, Maria Savishna at her shoulder, Zotov at the door, Krapovitsky in the ante-room writing everything down twice, Zubov below the stair with his monkey and his mirrors, Potemkin sweeping in and out like a comet with the smell of the southern steppe on him, Paul circling far out in the cold, waiting, two small Grand Dukes underfoot, one ageing greyhound, and you, furniture with a heartbeat, warm tin box under your skirt, learning them all by their footsteps. You'd think, from inside, it could run like that forever. The palace is designed to feel eternal. That's what all the stone is for. It has in fact 5 years. Before the dark part starts, you get one morning above it all, and you'll keep it the rest of your life, so we'll keep it too. It is May of 1791, and the chimneys of the private apartments are being swept and relined for the year. And because the wardrobe service answers for the soot cloths laid over the furniture, you are sent up past the attics where you used to sleep, up an iron ladder through a hatch smelling of pigeons and cold tar, onto the roof of the Winter Palace. You come out of the hatch and the sky takes you like a wave. You have lived 4 years inside this building and never once seen it. The roof is a country of its own, a tin plain, acres of it, painted and seamed, studded with chimney stacks like the stumps of a giant's forest, ridged and valleyed, with plank walkways for the sweeps and rope rings rusted into the seams, and beyond its edges, everything. The Neva below you, wide as a sea arm, blue-brown and pouring, ice gone these 3 weeks, barges and boats stitched across it. The fortress of Peter and Paul straight opposite, its cathedral spire a gold needle with the morning on it. Under that spire, though you don't dwell on it, the Romanovs lie buried, and one of them is a husband this story has already lost. The Admiralty's spire to your right. The great half-built bulk of granite embankments running away east and west. The smoke of 20,000 stoves standing up straight in the morning still, and the city going on until it frays into marsh and birch and the whole green flatness of Russia beyond, which does not end, which you know does not end. 5 days of it just to reach Ryazan, and Ryazan is nothing, is the doorstep, and it keeps going past the Urals into lands the length of 10 Francis, where it is still yesterday when it is today here. All of it steered from one desk, 3 floors under your shoes, by a woman with ice water on her face and spectacles down her nose. The head sweep is up there, an old man with a seamed grey face and forearms like ship's cable, drinking cold third brew coffee from a tin flask, and he watches you gape with the satisfaction of a landlord. It is his roof, in every way that matters. He has worked it for 40 years. "That's the trick of it, girl," he says, nodding at the drop below where a sentry the size of a beetle is crossing Palace Square. "From down there, this house looks like heaven. Golden giants. From up here..." He taps his boot on the tin. "It's a stove. Biggest stove in the world, and every soul in it either feeds the fire or sits warm by it. And there's no third sort of person, and don't let anybody tell you there is." He grins, 3 teeth in it. "Her downstairs, the one who put my matvey out of temper that morning, you know the story. Everyone knows the story. She's the only one I ever heard of who does both. Feeds it and rules it. That's why the house loves her, and the ones in silk can't work out why." He caps the flask. "You'll remember this roof when you're old. Nobody remembers ballrooms. Everybody remembers the one time they stood over the top of their whole life and saw it plain." He's right, you will, you do. And time from up there does what time does. The seasons begin to run. That summer browns and shortens. The Neva freezes in November and becomes a road with sledge tracks and fish holes. In February for the butter week, ice hills go up along the river and the whole city counts to carters, shrieks down them on sledges till dusk. In April the ice goes out with a sound like a boneyard waking. Grey floes grinding seaward for a week, and the flood guns stand ready. In June the sun barely sets, and the light at midnight is the colour of weak tea, and nobody in the attics can sleep, and nobody minds. The palace breathes in and out around the year the way a village did, only in gold. Girls in the attic corridor marry out of service. The girl from Novgorod goes home a bride, and leaves you the rose soap, and you cry more at that than you ever cried for yourself. New girls come in with November faces and cry silently the first month, and now you're the one who leaves the heel of white bread on the pillow and says nothing. Your hands have changed. There are seams in them now that don't wash out, and you know linen blindfolded by weight and nap alone. The Empress's step on the far side of the wall is slower this year than last. The old dog's muzzle goes from grey to white. The pen scratches on. The fire is always already lit. And then it is October of 1791, and a courier comes up the Neva road with mud to his shoulders, and the small rooms learn what grief looks like when it happens to an autocrat. Prince Potemkin was in the south, at Jassy, wringing a peace treaty out of the Turks to end his own long war. He'd been ill for weeks, marsh fever on and off, ignored, insulted with work and watermelons and his own gigantic refusals to be mortal. On the 5th of October, old style, on the road out of Jassy into the open steppe, he ordered the carriage stopped, said he had come to the end of it, and was lifted out and laid on grass at the roadside on a spread cloak. He died there, in the enormous open air he'd annexed. His head, the story that came north with the couriers, and there's no reason to doubt it, on the lap of his niece. A soldier's cloak under him, and an empire's worth of unfinished letters in the carriage. They say a Cossack of the escort closed his one eye with 2 copper coins. The courier reached the Winter Palace on the 12th. You were in the linen room off the inner corridor, and you will remember all your life that you knew before you were told. The building changed sound. Doors began going somewhere far off fast, then nothing, then a bell rung hard, then nothing again, a long nothing, the whole vast stove of a palace holding its breath around one room. What happened in that room is not gossip. The quiet man from the anteroom wrote it in his diary that same night, and history has checked him 100 ways since. She wept so that they feared for her. The doctors were called, and she was bled. She could not be read to, couldn't answer papers. The woman whose answering of papers was as fixed as the tide. Tears and despair, the diary says plainly, and the diary was not written to flatter anyone. It was written in the dark for no one. She shut herself in. Maria Savishnia and the closest women kept the door, and through it, late, more than one of them heard the sentence the household would carry ever after, the sovereign of 100 million people saying to a dark room, "Now there is no one left on whom I can rely." You saw her 4 days after, the first morning she took the coffee tray again. The fire was lit. She had lit it. The habit held when everything else buckled, and you understood at last that the habit was not charm, it was keel. She was at the desk. The pen was in her hand and was not moving. She sat with her spectacles on, and her hand still for the better part of an hour, and the old dog sat upright against her leg the whole time, leaning, doing the one thing dogs know for grief. And the gold snuff-box with the Tsar's face on it stood before her, and if she asked it anything that morning, it kept her counsel. She was 62. He had been the one human being in the world who knew all of it. The whole weight, the coup, the nights, the arithmetic of holding it. And now the knowledge lived in one head only, hers, for good. The pamphlets, when they mention his death at all, note the size of his pensions. That is what they saw from outside. You were inside. The difference between those two views is the reason this story exists. After that autumn, the world outside the walls turns feral, and the small rooms age with the news the way faces age in fever. France has been on fire for 2 years already. You were hauling linen the July morning in '89 when the couriers brought word that a Paris mob had stormed the king's own fortress prison, and you heard a footman laugh and say it couldn't matter. France was far. France gets nearer every season after. The letters from Paris come like reports of a spreading sickness. The king seized, the king a prisoner, the palace of the Tuileries stormed, and his Swiss guard, hired Swiss, servants-at-arms, men of your own kind in someone else's livery, butchered on the staircases. She reads them all. She, who traded wit with Voltaire and bankrolled Diderot, who filed the encyclopedia on her shelves, she watches the country of her own enlightenment cut its way into a new world through the necks of its masters, and something in the small rooms goes permanently colder. In January of 1793 they behead the King of France in his own capital, before a crowd with a machine. The news reaches Petersburg some 2 weeks later, and the household record of that week is stark. She took it like a death in the family. She was ill, she kept her bed, which she never does. The court was put into mourning, 6 weeks of black, as for kin. Then she rose and did what she does, which is work. French goods banned, French ships barred from her ports, every Russian in France ordered home, the borders watched. The desk in the small rooms, which spent the 70s writing to philosophers, spends the 90s writing against their consequences. You want to know what history feels like from inside a palace? It feels like the same room, the same pen, the same coffee, and the letters underneath the pen turning year by year from dawn to ice. That same year, quietly, the anteroom loses its best eyes. Krapovitsky is promoted out. A senator now, honours, a bow all around. She keeps those who serve her, one way or another, always. On his last morning he stands a moment in the little corridor, portfolio under his arm, looking at the papered door with an expression you know from mirrors, the look of a man leaving the warm side of a wall. He catches you with your tray, and, first time in 7 years, speaks to you. "Take care of her hours, girl," he says. "The hours are the whole secret," and is gone down the stair, taking his diary with him into history. The Empress is 64, then 65, then 66. The legs that rode to a coup in cavalry boots are swollen now and slow to obey. At Tsarskoye Selo they have built her, in place of the garden steps, a long gentle ramp, so that she can walk down into her own park without lifting her feet. The whole court pretending, with her, not to notice what it means. The household, which dresses those legs, spared the pretending. Stares are quietly disappearing from her days. The spectacles are stronger. The secretaries read aloud more. The walks are shorter, and the old dog no longer pulls. But the fire is still lit before 6, and the ice basin still goes in, and the pound of coffee still goes into the pot, and the hand, when it takes up the pen, is still, all the doctors marvel, perfectly firm. You are 24 now. You've been 9 years behind the papered door, and the year that has just begun, it is 1796, is going to need everything this story has taught you. It begins, in fairness, with joy. On the 25th of June, a third grandson is born, Nicholas, a giant of a baby. She writes to her correspondents, delighted and astonished, that the child has hands nearly the size of hers and a voice to match, and the small rooms get a week of the grandmother at her sunniest, planning this new life in paragraphs. Meanwhile, young Valerian Zubov, the favourite's brother, is off leading her armies down the Caspian shore against Persia. A war the anteroom mutters was got up chiefly to make a hero of a Zubov, and the mutter is in the diaries too, so I give it to you as what it is. Informed spite, probably half true. But the great business of 1796, the thing the whole palace vibrates with from August on, is a wedding, or what was meant to be one. Her eldest granddaughter, Alexandra, Paul's girl, is 13, fair, gentle, and terrified in the way of children who have been discussed by chancelleries since birth. The design is brilliant on paper. Marry her to the boy king of Sweden, Gustav IV Adolf, 17, and stitch the old enemy to Russia with a ring. The king comes to Petersburg himself in August, incognito as a Count Haga, which fools exactly no one and is not meant to, and for weeks the capital is one long ball. And the strange sweet thing, the thing everyone remarks, the children like each other. actually, visibly. He is grave and pale and follows Alexandra with his eyes. She goes about lit from inside. The old Empress watches them across ballrooms like a gardener watching a graph take, and the household sees 10 years lift off her. One clause remains: the girl's faith. She is orthodox. She must remain orthodox as Queen of Sweden. Freedom of worship, her own chapel. For the Empress, this is granite, non-negotiable. The honour of the dynasty and the church. The Swedes haggle. Their king is head of a Lutheran church and young enough to be devout about it. But the diplomats report progress, then agreement in substance, then agreement. The betrothal is fixed for the 11th of September, old style, in the great throne room of the Winter Palace, before the entire court. You are there, not among the guests. Servants are not guests. But the wardrobe service has duties at the edges of great occasions, and so you stand that evening in the shadow of a service doorway at the far end of the gallery, where a girl in grey wool becomes invisible against the pilasters, with a view down the whole blazing length of it. You've never seen the state apartments fired to full power. It is worth your 9 years. Thousands of candles, the chandeliers like burning ships overhead, the diamonds on 300 bodies giving back the light in points too quick to count, the Metropolitan and his clergy in vestments like fields of wheat, the little Grand Duchess in silver, so pale her lips have no colour, standing beside her grandmother's chair, and the Empress herself in full dress, as you have never once seen her in the small rooms, the woman of the ice basin and the grey gown, mounted now in the whole apparatus, brocade, orders, the small crown, the face composed into the profile from the coins, 2 selves, and you may be the only person in the room who knows the other one is real. The court waits for the king, and the king does not come. At first it is nothing. Kings are late, ceremonies breathe. A quarter hour. The orchestra plays something twice. A half hour. Whispering begins at the edges and is crushed by looks. An hour. Chamberlains begin to move along the walls with a particular smooth urgency that the household reads like print. Something, somewhere, has gone wrong at the level where nothing is allowed to. From your doorway you watch a minister, Platon Zuboff himself, glittering, gone white around the mouth, leave and return, leave and return. The story assembles later from a dozen anterooms into the shape history now confirms. In his own apartments, dressed to come, the boy king has been handed the final marriage instrument, has read the article guaranteeing the Grand Duchess her orthodox faith, the article his own negotiators had accepted, and has refused to sign it. Refused absolutely. Conscience, he says. They argue at him for hours. Ministers of 2 empires take in turns. He is 17 and immovable, and somewhere in that palace of arguing men it becomes late, and then impossible, and someone at last must go into a throne room containing the entire assembled might of Russia, and tell the Empress that the bridegroom is not coming. 2 hours and more that court stood. You stood it with them, calves burning, watching the child in silver hold herself upright in front of 300 people while her evening died. A 13-year-old learning in public by the hour what she is worth to a Lutheran conscience. When the word finally came and could no longer be softened, you were watching the grandmother, because by then everyone was. She rose from the chair, and the room saw the Empress rise calmly, say what was needed, the indisposition of His Majesty, the ceremony postponed, and withdraw with full state, and the court exhaled and told itself the story was diplomatic weather, repairable, next week perhaps. But you were at the servant's end, where the state falls away, and the household's memory of that night is different, and the household's memory is corroborated now by sober historians, that as she turned, the mask slipped sideways for one instant, that she needed the arm, really needed it, of the person nearest, that the words she got out came thick, as if the mechanism of speech had caught, that what crossed her face was not rage. Rage the household knew, and could have warmed itself on. This was something none of you had a name for yet. A machine, for one instant, missing. Her doctors were about her that night, and the next day. The Scots physician Rogerson, who has managed her health for 20 years mostly by being ignored, was not ignored that week. The precise medical truth of that evening no one can swear to at this distance. Some who were close said outright that a small stroke brushed her then, in September, and went on its way. Others said fury and exhaustion only. I promised to mark the line, so here it is, not proven. What is proven is the change your own hands felt in the weeks after. She tired by afternoon. The walk stopped. The evening parties thinned to almost no one. The girl in silver was sent back to her parents unbetrothed, and the king went home to Sweden, and the papers on the desk closed over the wound the way water closes. But on the far side of the wall, that autumn, the pen stopped oftener, and the stops were longer. And once in October, bringing the ice basin at 6, you found her not at the desk but at the window, in the dark, looking out at nothing that could be seen, one hand resting on the head of the old dog, and neither of them moved while you set the basin down and you left on your felt soles with your heart pressing strangely, and did not know why you thought, on the back stair, of your mother's tin box against your hip. You had no reason. You checked it was there anyway. I will tell you now what you could not know then. You have entered the first week of November, 1796, old style. The Empress has kept every habit through the autumn. The fire, the ice, the pound of coffee, the desk before dawn. On the evening of the 4th she's even bright. A small card party in the small rooms, old friends, and she laughs that evening. The household hears it through the wall and is glad. On the morning of the 5th of November she will rise as always, and Maria Savishna will ask how she slept, and she will say, well, better than in a long while. She will light nothing that morning. The stove will already be warm. She will drink her coffee. She will speak of the day's work, and then she will step alone into the little dressing closet off the bedchamber, as she does every morning of her life. And the palaces held breath. The one this whole story has been drawing begins there, at a closed door, with an old valet counting minutes in an anteroom. Stay with me now. This is the part the liars never tell, because the truth outranks them. This is how it actually was. The morning of the 5th is grey and mild for November. The Neva running dark and slow, not yet ice. You're in the linen room off the inner corridor at 9, folding, when the morning's rhythm, 9 years in your bones, you could keep it in your sleep, misses. It is nothing you could put in words at first. A door that should have sounded doesn't. A tray that should have come back stands in the corridor. The particular cadence of Zotov's step in the anteroom, back and forth, back and forth, too many times. The Empress had risen at her hour, slept well, better than in a long while, she said. Coffee taken, the biscuits down to the dog as always. The secretary's portfolios told her wait a moment. And then she'd gone into the little closet off the bedchamber, alone, as every morning, and she has not come out. Zotov waits. There is an etiquette even to alarm. A valet does not knock on that door. He waits past all custom, and the custom of 30 years is exact to the minute, and the minutes go, 10, then more, and in the linen room you hear, faintly, the first wrong sound. A knuckle on wood, soft, then not soft. Then his voice, once, low. Then a silence with a new colour in it. Then the door. It opens outward, and it will not open. Something bears against it from inside. What Zakhar Zotov does next will be retold in this palace for 100 years, in the flat voice men keep for the worst mornings of their lives, and it is in the record plain. He forces the gap wide enough for his shoulders, and goes through, and finds the Empress of Russia on the floor of the closet, fallen between the door and the wall, her weight wedging it shut. Eyes closed, face darkened to crimson, breath coming slow and terrible, a sound he will say he never afterward stopped hearing. One foot bent against the door. She'd fallen trying, with whatever was left of her, to reach it. The bell then, not rung, hauled, and the small rooms detonate. You're in the corridor with linen in your arms when it happens, and so you see what the histories compress into a line. The private apartments of the Winter Palace, the quietest rooms in the empire, filling in 2 minutes like a breached hull. Maria Savishna at a dead run. You've never once seen her run, with her cap unpinned. Footmen, the duty physician. And from below, through the baize door, up the 14 steps of the little staircase, taking them 3 at once, Platon Zubov, half-dressed, unpowdered, and on his face. You're pressed to the corridor wall. He passes an arm's length away and does not see you. He will never see you. On his beautiful, useless face is the naked arithmetic of a man whose entire existence hangs on one heartbeat in the next room. So that staircase carried its last traffic after all. Not what the pamphlet sold. Terror going up. They cannot lift her. Understand it plainly. It is in every account. She is a heavy woman of 67 without sense or muscle, in a space the size of a pantry, and the strongest men of the household must be fetched. It takes 6 of them, working in that terrible cramped gentleness with which strong men handle what they dare not grip, to bring her out. And here the household makes on its own instinct the decision the world will read about. The bed is too high, too far, impossible for the doctor's work. So they bring the mattress to her. A mattress of red Morocco leather is laid on the floor of the bedchamber. Beside the bed she rose from that morning, and on it they lay the autocrat of all the Russias, on the floor of her own bedroom, and on that floor, on that leather, the reign of Catherine the Great, 34 years, the length of your mother's whole adult life, comes down to breath going in and breath coming out. Dr. Rogerson arrives within the hour, the Scot, Greyhound himself, who has teased and been teased by her for 20 years, who once was told by his imperial patient that she kept her health chiefly by ignoring physicians. He kneels on the parquet. He does what his sentry knows, opens a vein, draws blood, sets blistering plasters to the soles of her feet, watches the pupils, the breath, the crimson stillness of the face. And then he stands, and the household reads his back through the open door, and his back says what he will say in words quietly to the family this evening. Apoplexy. A stroke. Massive at the centre of her. The striking down is finished. Everything now is only the leaving. She does not wake. Hold on to that through everything that follows, because it is the documented mercy of this story. From the moment the door would not open, Through all the 36 hours that remain, she is never once conscious. No pain that shows, no fear, no farewell denied, and none of the melodrama later invented either. There is only the great slow tide of her breathing filling the small rooms, audible. The household swears it and the memoirs agree. Through two closed doors, the palace holds its breath around hers. That is not a figure of speech. You live the next day and a half inside it. The staterooms empty and blazing with candles nobody ordered lit. The anterooms filling with the great of the empire arriving on tiptoe, metropolitans and field marshals whispering like schoolboys outside a sick room, the kitchens cooking for hundreds and nobody eating, and running through all of it, under all of it, that one slow, terrible rhythm from the bedchamber in and out and in. A rider has gone to Gatchina. Nikolai Zubov, the favourite's massive brother, took the road within the hour. A Zubov carrying the news, which the anteroom notes even now, because the man who tells an heir he is about to be emperor is a man making the last investment of his house. Toward evening the courtyard sounds, hooves many, and Paul comes. You see him come up, not by the little staircase, by the proper stairs, in his Gatchina uniform, his wife beside him, his sons Alexander and Constantine white-faced behind, and the palace that has feared him at a distance for 30 years watches him walk toward his mother's rooms and does the deepest bow of its life. Say this for the record, because the record says it. At the door of the bedchamber, at the sight of the mattress on the floor, the man's composure went, and for a moment there was no emperor in waiting and no dynastic winter, only a sun in a doorway. He knelt by her. Whatever there was between them, and there was everything between them, he knelt. But the night goes on, and she does not wake, and a fact begins to move through the anterooms with a cold life of its own. Nothing is signed. If papers exist, the whisper of years, the succession passed over him to Alexander, they exist in that study, in her desk, now, tonight, in a palace where she still breathes and he does not yet reign. And so, in the small hours, you see the thing that you will tell no one about for the rest of your life, and that history knows happened in its outline even as the details stay sealed. Lights in the study. The new powers already at the desk of the old. Paul, and with him Bezbrodko, her own great Secretary of State these 20 years, smooth, vast, indispensable, and newly visibly his, going through the papers of the living Empress while her breathing comes through the wall, sorting, sealing, bundles tied and carried, seals pressed by candlelight, and the fireplace in the study lit. You know that fire was lit because you can smell it in the corridor. Paper smoke, unmistakable to a girl who has smelled every fire in these rooms for 9 years. Was the testament real, and did it burn that night? The whisper says yes. Some memoirs say a packet tied in black went into the flame. Bezbrodko's fortunes under the new reign, you'll see. Say something purchased a spectacular gratitude, but no one living produced the document, then or ever. And I promised you the line, so here is the line drawn hard. Papers burned that night. What was in them, no one can prove. That is all history can honestly say, and it is somehow worse than certainty. On the desk in the middle of it all, untouched, the gold snuff-box stands where it has stood for 30 years. Peter the Great, face up under the candlelight, watching the sorting with that stern, impossible stare. What would he command? Nobody asks him tonight. The one person who ever asked is on the floor in the next room leaving, and at the door of the bedchamber itself, this you saw with your own eyes, coming and going all that endless second day with cloths and water. This is yours. Lies the old dog. She'd been shut out of the sick room for the doctor's sake, and she took up her post against the door seam nose to the gap, flat as something emptied, and she did not eat, and she did not sleep, and when anyone made to move her, she showed, without lifting her head, one yellow tooth, and was let be. An empire's worth of grief in the anterooms, cardinals of the church and marshals of Russia, in tiers of every quality from true to useful, and the honestest mourner in the Winter Palace was a white-muzzled greyhound holding a door. The evening of the 6th of November, old style, the 17th of November by the new calendar, for those keeping the world's time. The breathing that has filled the small rooms for a day and a half begins to lengthen its intervals. The family is brought in. The clergy has done all its offices. She was given the last rites in her unconsciousness. The oils touched to her while the prayers went over her like weather. The household is let to kneel in the outer room, and Maria Savishna is at the head of the mattress where she's been, in some, for 30 hours, holding one hand as though a grip could anchor what a stroke could not. At 10:15, the interval opens and does not close. 34 years. From the June morning she took an army salute in a borrowed uniform to a red leather mattress on her own bedroom floor. The physicians make their notations. The Metropolitan begins the prayer for the departure of the soul, and through the open doors of the small rooms, front and back, along the corridors where you stand pressed against the whitewash with the other servants, wall still, faces wet, the word goes out of the private apartments and into the palace, and out of the palace and into the world. In the anteroom someone, you never learn who, and it does not matter, it was the household itself acting through a pair of hands. Someone stops the clock, and the first voice heard in the state rooms, after the silence, is a chamberlain's, already turned toward the study door, already pitched new, the Emperor. And then, slowly, the way a wave that has stood impossibly tall finally folds and spreads and becomes flat water again, it is over, and the long quiet afterward begins. Stay with me here in the quiet. This part is gentler, and it is still true, and it belongs to the story as much as the storm does, maybe more, because this is the part where you learn what remains of a person when the power goes out of the rooms. The first thing that changes is the sound of the palace. Within a day, within hours, the corridors fill with a noise none of you have ever heard inside these walls. Boot heels, struck down hard, in step, in numbers. The Gatchina battalions have come to town with their master, and the Winter Palace, which for 34 years has run on felt soles and murmurs, begins to ring like a garrison. Sentries appear at doors that never had sentries, inner doors, household doors, the doors of linen rooms, as if pillowcases might conspire. New orders come down daily, then hourly, written in a new voice, short, barked, precise about buttons. The city gets its share. Within weeks the round hats of Paris fashion are forbidden in the streets, French cut coats forbidden, the very word citizen unwelcome. Grown men are stopped at corners by patrols over the shape of their collars. Inside, the household is reuniformed, rescheduled, redrilled. Dinner at the new Emperor's table is early, brief, and silent. Lights out through the palace by 10, by order. The great stove of a building goes on being fed by the same hundreds of hands. But the temperature of it, the temper of it, will never be the same again in your lifetime, and everyone from the head sweep to the marshals knows it by the end of the first week. The fire behind the paper door is not lit before dawn anymore. There is no one it belongs to. You pass the anteroom on the third morning and stop because your body stops you. No scratch of a pen, no smell of the pot. In the little pantry off the anteroom, on its spirit stand, the Sèvres coffee pot sits clean, dry and cold, and the tin measure hangs on its hook, and no pound of coffee will ever again go down that chain of grounds, stove men to scullery, that warmed the underside of the palace for a generation. The stokers notice it the way you'd notice a stopped church bell. It seems a small thing to grieve, a coffee pot with an empire changing hands overhead. The household grieves it. Small things are how a household loves. The old dog is coaxed at last from the bedchamber door by Maria Savishna herself, who kneels down to her, the two oldest keepers of that room, forehead to muzzle, and takes her away to her own chambers and feeds her by hand. The dog will not enter the bedchamber again. She has walked daily. She eats a little. She sleeps thereafter in Maria Savishna's rooms, an old pensioner among pensioners. And if you want to know how long a good dog keeps a post in her heart, the answer the household gives, watching her stop forever after at that one door seam and stand a moment with her white muzzle down, is, as long as she lasts. Nobody hurries her past it, not even the new sentries who learn her, as sentries learn everything and look away. The Empress lies in state, and the whole city files past, and you file past too, once, in your grey wool, in the line of the household, between a laundress and a stove man with his cap in his fists. And then, in December, the new reign performs the strangest public act Petersburg has ever witnessed. And because it is documented to the hour, and because you cannot understand Paul or the end of this story without it, you will go out into the cold and see it. The Emperor has ordered his father raised. Peter III, dead these 34 years, buried without a crown at the monastery of Alexander Nevsky at the far end of the city. Peter of the toy soldiers, the husband of the memoirs, the man deposed on a June morning in 1762 and dead at Ropshire 8 days later, is exhumed by his son's command. The coffin is opened. What 34 years have left is dressed anew, and in a ceremony that makes the ambassadors' pens shake with the effort of sounding respectful, Paul crowns the remains, takes a crown of Russia and touches it to what was his father, the coronation the dead man never had. And then, through the frozen streets with the temperature dropping through the bones of the whole city, the funeral procession of Peter III marches from the monastery to the Winter Palace, and walking before the coffin, carrying the imperial crown on its cushion, by the Emperor's explicit and inescapable command, is Count Alexei Orlov, the guard commander of Ropshire, the man whose letter about a drunken brawl you already know, nearing 60 now, a giant gone grey, made to carry through the streets before all Petersburg the crown of the man whose death happened in his keeping. The whole city watches him do it. Those who see his face keep describing it for the rest of their lives. And then husband and wife lie in state together side by side, the Empress and the Emperor she overthrew, equal at last in candlelight, and together, on the same December day, they are carried across the frozen river to the fortress cathedral, under the gold needle you saw from the roof in another life, and buried side by side under the same stone floor. Whatever that procession was, piety, vengeance, justice, a son rearranging the past with the only tools an autocrat has, the household watches it dry-eyed and understands the message precisely because the household has always been fluent in ceremony. Everything she built, I may unbuild. Even this, even her. The favourite's apartments below the little staircase stand empty before New Year. Platon Zubov's fall is so swift and so total that it becomes, below stairs, a kind of weather report, a lesson the palace has taught before and will teach again, the head sweep's lesson wearing silk. Feed the fire or sit warm by it, and heaven help the man who forgot there was a fire. For a few days the new emperor is showily courteous to him, visits him, drinks his health, a cat's courtesy, and then the offices go, one by one, and the regiments, and the palaces, and the anteroom that grovel to his monkey cannot recall his name. Within the year he will be abroad, wandering the spas of Europe with his diamonds and his desolation, 30 years old with his entire life behind him. The green baize door at the foot of the 14 steps is locked now, and then you're there the morning the workmen come. You hold the dust sheet. It is papered over. The famous staircase of the pamphlets ends its history as a wall. There is a justice in that so neat you could almost suspect history of doing it on purpose. And the household of the small room scatters gently, the way a hand opens. Maria Savishna Perkusikina is not punished. Even Paul, who is unbuilding everything, knows better than to touch her. She is pensioned with honour, an income for life, an apartment, later an estate, and she takes her leave of the rooms she kept for a quarter of a century, carrying one small valise, most of which you help her pack it. It is the last service you do her, both of you working in a silence that is the only possible language for that morning, most of which is not silk or keepsakes of value, but small things of no account to anyone alive but 2 women from Ryasan. A japanned box of honey cracknels, a folded grey gown, a dog's brush. At the door she looks round the anteroom once, the way you look at a field you have mown your whole life, and then she looks at you and she says the last thing she will ever teach you, and it is this: "Well, girl, we served her. Let them say what they like in the town. We know what we know." And she pats your cheek once, like your grandmother at the fair, and goes down the proper stairs, slowly, in her good plain dress, into her long quiet years. She will live far into the reign of the Empress's beloved grandson Alexander, an old lady famous for 2 things, her kindness and her silence. Zakhar Zotov stands his last duty, hands over his keys by inventory, every snuff box, every candlestick, the gold box with the Tsar's portrait itemized by a clerk who has no idea what he is holding, entered in the ledger, carried away to the treasuries, and retires into the city on his pension, an old man on a bench by the Neva in summers to come, who is pointed at sometimes. That one found her. He never speaks of it in public, not once, to his death. The anteroom trained him too well. Dr. Rogerson stays on, physician now to the new court, Scots and dry and indestructible, and doctors it for 20 years more before he finally goes home to his own green hills to die a laird. Krapovitsky serves his senate honourably into the new century and leaves behind the diary, the quiet man's quiet bomb, which will do more for the truth of these rooms than every marble monument in Russia. Bezborodko is made a prince of the empire and chancellor within months of that night of paper smoke in the study. Draw from that exactly what the anteroom drew, no more, no less, and dies in harness before the century turns, and the Emperor Paul reigns 4 years and 4 months, reversing, reuniforming, refortifying, trusting no one, until a March night in 1801 in his own new castle in this same city, when officers of his own court come to his bedchamber, and his reign ends in the dark, violently at their hands, and among the names history records in that conspiracy's outer circle stand, because this story owes you its symmetries, The brothers Zuboff, home from exile. The son who crowned his father's bones is buried by sons of his own era's making. That is not immoral. It is just Russia, in those years, closing a circle the way rivers close over stones. But before all that, in the first thaw of 1797, with the new rain hardening around the palace like ice around a hull, you do the arithmetic of your own small life, and you find that it is finished here, not by dismissal. You could stay. Trained hands are trained hands, and the new mistress of the wardrobes has already spoken to you twice. But the rooms are wrong now. The work was never the work. The work was her hours. The quiet man on the stairs told you so, and you didn't understand him for years. And now, dusting a desk that no pen scratches at, you understand him completely. Some service is to a house. Yours, it turns out, was to a person. The person is under the stone floor across the river. You are 25 years old. You have 9 winters of the best training in the empire in your hands, a pension gift from Maria Savishna's own purse sewn into your hem, and a proposal, the palace being a village, and villages being villages, from a sober, kind-eyed master joiner of the Admiralty district, who's been finding reasons to mend things near the linen rooms for 2 years. So in April, when the ice goes out at the Neva with its old graveyard grinding, and the flood guns stand down, and the light comes back to the city like a debt repaid, you go down the back stairs of the Winter Palace for the last time, 400 and some steps, 2 turns dark even at noon, and out through the servants' door you first entered in another century of your life, 9.5 years before. You do not look back up at the windows. You are your mistress's pupil in this too. What is finished is finished. The day ahead is the only day there is. Sentiment is for the evening, in small doses, with the fire lit. In your pocket, warm against your hip, rides a dented tin box. And in the small wooden house off the Admiralty district where your new life begins, 2 rooms, a workbench smell of shavings and glue, a husband who sleeps like a felled tree, you rise, that first free morning of your married life, at 5, out of 9 years' habit, out of your bones, and you stand a moment in the dark of your own kitchen, in your own house, holding your mother's flint and steel, and then you kneel at your own small stove and strike your own fire quietly, so as not to wake the one tired person sleeping under your roof. And halfway through the striking you have to stop because your eyes have gone too blurred to see the charcloth catch. Because now it is yours, you understand it from the inside at last. The fire lit before anyone wakes is not a chore and was never an eccentricity. It is what a person does who has decided, in the 1 hour of the day that belongs to no one else, who she intends to be. Your mother knew it in a log house in Ryazan. An empress knew it in the largest palace on earth. And now you know it, and you will do it every morning of your life, and your daughters will roll their eyes at it, and then, decades on, in kitchens of their own, catch themselves doing it, and stop, and stand very still a moment in the dark, the way you are standing now. You will need that fire, and that hour, and everything the small rooms taught you. 'Cause now come the years of the lies, and you're going to spend the rest of your life hearing them. It begins almost at once. It began, in truth, before the stone was over her, in the town, in the market, at christenings and boat launchings, wherever 2 fools and a jug meet. The stories. The German woman, they say, winking. You know what they say about her, and what they say, year by year, grows. First, it is merely the favourites, inflated from a documented dozen to legions to regiments. Then it is the sneering inventions dressed as court secrets, the testing ladies, the exhausted couriers, each teller adding a room, a number, a leer. And then some years into the new century, drifting back into Russia from abroad, the way spoiled goods drift, comes the last one, the big one, the one with the horse. You hear it first from a drunken customs clerk at a name-day table, telling it to a circle of men who laugh with their heads back, and it is the only time in your married life your husband ever sees you stand up, cross a room, and empty a jug over a guest. So now let me keep the promise I made you at the start of this story. Let's take it apart. In the open, in plain words, bolt by bolt, and then let's never touch it again. Here is the claim, stated once without the leer, that the Empress died as a consequence of an unspeakable act involving a horse and a failed harness. You have heard it. Everyone now living has heard it. It may be the single most successful lie ever told about a human being. Bolt 1. The date and manner of her death are among the best documented of the entire 18th century. She was struck down by apoplexy, a stroke, alone, in the small dressing closet of her own bedchamber, on the morning of the 5th of November 1796, old style, the 17th by the calendar you keep now. She was found by her valet, Zakhar Zotov, wedged against the door. She was attended by a named physician, Rogerson, whose diagnosis survives. She lay unconscious for roughly 36 hours on a leather mattress on her bedroom floor, surrounded at the end by her family, her clergy, her ministers and her household. Dozens of witnesses of every rank, many of whom wrote down what they saw independently in diaries and dispatches that agree with one another. Ambassadors of foreign powers, men paid to be sceptical, reported the same sequence to their own courts that week. There is no gap in that record for a legend to live in. None. Bolt 2. The story appears in no source from her lifetime, and in none from the years around her death. Nothing in 1796. Nothing from anyone who stood in those corridors. It surfaces later, years, decades later, abroad, in the gutters of foreign print and barracks talk, and it cannot be traced to a single witness, document, or place. A fact about the world. Real events leave records where they happen. Slanders leave records where they're useful. Bolt 3. It wasn't even original. It was a hand-me-down. The last decades of that century ran a whole industry of obscene political pamphlets, and its favourite target was always the same. A foreign-born woman with power. Ask Marie Antoinette. The presses of Paris spent 20 years inventing filth about her body, and then guillotined her partly on the strength of their own inventions. The machinery that did that to the Queen of France did this to the Empress of Russia. Take the most powerful woman of the age, take the fact that she, openly, unhypocritically, had lovers, and inflate it, cartoon by cartoon, pamphlet by pamphlet, into something bestial. Because bestial is what frightened men call a woman whose power they cannot explain away. Her real offence was never the staircase. Her real offence was that she took a throne with her own hands, held it for 34 years, beat the Ottoman Empire twice, and reserved the right to love whom she chose while doing it. The exact combination for which kings of the same century were called great. Augustus of Saxony had children past counting, and they named him the Strong. She had a dozen attachments, most of them loyal and long, and they gave her a horse. That is the entire mechanism of the legend. It is not history. It is revenge on a woman who died unbeaten, taken posthumously, because posthumously was the only way anyone could ever get her. She died of a stroke in her dressing room at 67, with her boots off and her empire intact. There was no horse. There was never a horse. Pass it on. And the memoirs, her own version, the frank pages you dusted, those the family locked away as too dangerous to exist, sealed by Paul, sealed again by his sons. The Emperor Nicholas is said to have permitted almost no living eyes on them. It took until 1859, 63 years after her death, for a copy smuggled out of Russia to reach a printing press in London. And when the world finally read the woman herself in her own words, the lonely girl, the toy soldiers on the counterpane, the vow to learn and wait, the effect was not what her heirs had feared, or the pamphleteers had hoped. Slander shrinks in the presence of a voice. It has been shrinking ever since, one honest reader at a time, and tonight it shrank a little more. As for you, the eyes I borrowed at the start of this story and must give back before it ends. The wardrobe girls of the small rooms are in the ledgers only as counts and wages. So many women of the inner service, so many roubles, so much cloth for winter dresses. No memoir of a Kammer Jungferer of those corridors survives with a name on it. Whoever you were, and you were dozens, and then hundreds, across those 34 years of lit fires and third brew coffee, and felt souls on the back stairs, history closed over you the way the Neva closes over a dropped ring, quietly, completely, keeping what it keeps. All I can promise is what this whole night has tried to be. The rooms were real, the habits were real, the kindness down the chimney and the grief behind the wall were real, and somebody's hands did every task I gave to yours. The record holds the Empress. You hold the rest. Maria Savishna would say that's enough. We know what we know. So let the story set you down now, gently, where all its people ended, in a small warm room at the end of a long day, with the fire banked and the light going. You're old now. Let's give you that. The one gift a storyteller can give a borrowed life. It is some year deep in the new century. The joiner's house has grown a second story and grandchildren. Your hands, folded on the quilt, have the same seams your mother's had. The ones that don't wash out. The ones earned by 50 years of other people's warmth. Across the city, on clear evenings, you can still see it if you walk to the end of the lane. The long roof line against the sunset, the acres of tin you once stood on, the windows going gold one by one as the lamps are lit by girls whose names you'll never know, who cry silently their first month and find bread on their pillows and learn which stairs are dark at noon. The palace goes on. Palaces do. It was never the palace you served anyway. And when the neighbours' children beg you for stories of the great world, because it has leaked out over the years, the way everything leaks except what mattered, that the quiet old woman at the end of the lane once served in the Winter Palace itself, in the very rooms, you give them always the same one, not the diamonds, not the throne room with its 1,000 candles, though they beg. You tell them about a winter morning and a dark corridor, and a girl with a heavy basket who was afraid she was late, and a door that opened, and a small woman in spectacles and a plain grey gown, kneeling at a stove in the dark with a flint in her hand, so that no tired person would be woken on her account. That's the story. That's the whole story. The children always wait for more, and there is no more, and one day, decades from now, standing in the dark of their own kitchens at 5 a.m, each of them will finally understand it and stand very still. The fire is lit. It is always already lit. Somebody rose before you and saw to it. A mother, an empress, a stranger. The long chain of hands going back and back. That is the secret the pamphlets never found. The only one there ever was, and now it is yours, and you can let it go. So let the day go with it. Let the palace go first, the corridors darkening one by one, the sentries settling, the great stove of a building breathing slower, holding its warmth against the Russian night the way it has held it all these years, the way it holds its dead and its stories, all of them, gently now. Let the city go, the gold needle over the fortress catching the last of the light and giving it up, the river running black and patient under its first skin of ice, the 10,000 chimneys sending up their smoke straight into the still air, each one a room, each room a fire, each fire somebody's morning already waiting on the far side of sleep. Let the people go, one by one, the way this story learned them. The old valet on his bench by the river, the quiet secretary in his diary, closed now, done now. The Scots doctor home among his green hills, the old woman from Ryazan with her japanned box, silent to the end, smiling at what she knows. The white-muzzled dog at her door seem at rest. The one-eyed giant asleep in the southern steppe he annexed under the enormous open air. And the Empress under the stone floor across the water, beside the husband time made quiet, her papers read, her slanders shrinking, her fires all handed on. Centuries will pass. They have passed already. You are lying in them now. The palace she knew will burn and be rebuilt and fill with paintings until it is nothing but paintings. And people from every country on earth will shuffle through her rooms in soft shoes, the whole world padding in felt soles at last, and hardly any of them will know, passing a certain stretch of wall, what a girl once carried up the dark stairs behind it. The empire will change its name and change it again. The city will change its name and change it back. But people will still rise before the ones they love and light the fire, or the stove, or the lamp, or the kettle, whatever their century burns. Still measure out the morning coffee in the dark. Still keep someone's small task in their own two hands, no matter how large their life gets. Because that task is where they keep themselves. Some things don't change. The 5 o'clock kindness doesn't change. And you, listening, you're part of that chain now, you understand. Somewhere in your house is your version of the tin box. Somewhere in your morning is the habit that is really a vow. It will be there tomorrow. Tomorrow there will be the alarm and the kettle and the day's whole empire of small demands. Tomorrow there will be work and weather and the 8,000 things. Tomorrow. But that's tomorrow. That is the one word with no power in this room tonight. Right now there is only this, the bed that holds you, which is enough. The warmth you're wrapped in, which is enough. The dark which is not empty. It is only the corridor before morning, and somewhere down at the end of it you may be sure the fire is already lit. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You've done enough. That's more than empires ever managed. That's enough. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took a girl from Ryazan in an attic corridor of the Winter Palace, 200 years ago and more, mid-thought, mid-breath, with the day's weight sliding off like a dropped cloak. Let the world fade. Let the last sounds soften. The house, the street, the far-off hum of your own century, until they are only the river under the ice, going where it goes. Let your thoughts slow and soften and finally stop. You've earned this rest. Whoever you are, whatever you carried today, you carried it. The basket is set down now. The door is closed. The clock for once can be let to stop. Take the rest. And dream, if you dream, of a small fire in a dark room, tended by kind hands, burning quietly until morning. Good night.